Caves are some of the most haunting places on Earth. Pitch black, silent, and endless, like stepping into another world where the only certainty is uncertainty itself. Beneath the surface, where light can't reach, the smallest mistake can become a fight for survival. In this episode, we're diving into 3 stories of people who ventured deep into these dark labyrinths and found themselves trapped, facing impossible odds. These tales reveal the true terror of being alone in the depths, where survival means battling both the darkness around you and the fear within. And before you continue, please be advised, some scenes may be unsettling. In the Yorkshire Dales, hidden beneath a serene expanse of hills and moors, lies the Mossdale Caverns. These caverns are a labyrinth of tunnels stretching over 10 kilometers, with some sections so narrow that a person has to twist and crawl just to inch forward. Known for its complexity and inherent danger, Mossdale holds the highest difficulty rating possible in the UK, a daunting 5 out of 5. This is a place for only the most seasoned explorers, and even they are not immune to its unpredictable nature. Mossdale Caverns is not just a place of tight passages and intricate tunnels, it's also a home to the Mossdale Beck River, which winds its way through the cave system. On a calm day, the water runs gently, pooling in certain chambers and trickling through narrow sections. But this seemingly tranquil river holds a deadly potential. When rain sweeps over the dales, Mossdale Beck can transform within minutes, flooding the cavern with cold, relentless waters, making it a place where even a slight shift in weather can turn life-threatening. On June 24, 1967, a group of 10 adventurers gathered at the entrance of Mossdale Caverns, ready for a day of exploration. The group was divided into 2 teams, 6 highly experienced cavers and a smaller group of 4, who were mostly there for the adventure of sightseeing within the less hazardous areas. The main expedition was led by the seasoned explorers, and their destination was one of the cavern's most notorious sections, the Far Marathon. This 900-foot stretch is infamous among cavers, a suffocatingly tight tunnel just 10 inches high and 2 feet wide. Even for the brave, the Far Marathon is not a journey to be taken lightly. It requires a calm mind, steady breathing, and near impossible ability to ignore the rock pressing down on all sides. The day was typical for an English summer, cool and gray, with the faintest hint of a drizzle, a weather forecast that felt innocuous at the time. The explorers descended into the darkness, their headlamps casting narrow beams against the limestone walls. Hours slipped by as they inched deeper into the cavern's twisting corridors and tight squeezes, moving further and further from the world above. But above ground, the weather had other plans. The faint drizzle transformed, almost imperceptibly, into a steady rain. In Yorkshire's hills, rainwater doesn't linger on the surface for long. It slips down through cracks and fissures, finding its way into the underground rivers and streams. By the time the rain intensified, Mossdale Beck had already started to swell, sending a rush of water into the caverns below. Inside, the cavers were deep into their journey when they first felt the chill of rising water brushing against their feet. At first, it seemed like nothing more than a slight inconvenience, a puddle, perhaps, from the usual trickle of Mossdale Beck. But then the water began to rise faster, surging into every corner and crevice of the caverns. Within moments, that slow trickle turned into a racing torrent, filling the tunnels with chilling speed. Realizing the severity of their situation, the 6 experienced cavers attempted to retrace their steps, navigating back through the tunnels in hopes of reaching higher ground. Yet in Mossdale Caverns, the way out isn't simply a matter of turning around. They had to twist and contort their bodies through narrow spaces, fighting against the rising water. For those caught in the Far Marathon, where the ceiling barely allowed room to lift one's head, each passing second brought the water closer. Panic might have been a natural response, but seasoned cavers know the deadly consequences of losing control. They moved carefully, using the rocks around them to brace against the currents. Yet as the water climbed, inch by inch, options became scarce. The tunnels that had been navigatable minutes before were now choked with rushing water, cutting off their escape. But the next morning the rain had stopped, and rescue teams were dispatched to Mossdale Caverns. Yet for those above ground, the sight of water gushing from the cave entrance told them all they needed to know. The caverns were fully flooded. Any hope for the survival of those 6 trapped cavers faded with each minute that passed. As the water levels finally receded, search teams ventured into the caverns. They found the bodies of the cavers between June 25th and 27th, forever trapped within the twisting maze they had once set out to conquer. Eventually, the decision was made to seal their final resting place, honoring the site as a memorial to the lives lost. For 3 years, the Mossdale Caverns remained closed, a silent monument to the perils of its dark depths. It wasn't until later that the bodies were carefully moved to a location within the caverns known as the Sanctuary, a final resting place for those who had braved the darkness of Mossdale. To this day, the tragedy remains the worst caving disaster in UK history, a somber reminder of nature's power and the dangers hidden within the earth. Located in South Africa's Gauteng province, the Sterkfontein Caves are known as one of the most significant archaeological sites on Earth. They're part of the Cradle of Humankind, a UNESCO World Heritage Site where some of the oldest human fossils have been unearthed. Each day, tourists visit to explore the ancient passages and witness the silent history encased within the limestone walls, stories dating back over 2 million years. Yet in these same caves, a more recent story remains, one that blends courage, loss, and one man's desperate struggle to survive. On September 29, 1984, Peter Verhousel and 2 other scuba divers ventured into Sterkfontein for what was intended to be an afternoon dive. Armed with a single aqua lung and a small flashlight each, they descended into the dark, silent waters. The allure of unexplored territory was strong, drawing them deeper into the cavern's submerged passages. But underwater, even the smallest misstep can turn fatal. And in these shadowy depths, an invisible danger lurked. Cave diving, especially in a complex system like Sterkfontein, demands meticulous care and respect. A single rope, a single guideline is often the only thread connecting divers to safety. But on that fateful day, Peter and his companions drifted away from this lifeline multiple times as curiosity pulled them deeper into the unknown. Somewhere along the way, the trio lost sight of the rope entirely, their only known anchor to the way out. Panic began to seep in as they searched for any familiar passage, only to find that each turn led them further into the belly of the cave. The group soon became separated, each diver alone, searching desperately through a maze of darkness. Peter, disoriented and isolated, managed to find a small air pocket, a rare, precious sanctuary of oxygen amid the surrounding water. In this pocket, he found a patch of sandy ground, a tiny island where he could rest and breathe. His light fading, Peter was forced to conserve the energy he had left, waiting in the dark, hoping that someone would come. In that cold silence, days bled into nights. Though within the pitch-black confines of the cave, it was impossible to tell the difference. Peter's survival instincts kicked in. He rationed his breath, stayed still to conserve energy, and clung to the slim hope that rescuers would find him. Days passed, and he endured the silence and hunger with unyielding determination. Somewhere within the depths of the cave, time lost all meaning, and Peter held on, inch by inch, to life. Above ground, search teams were deployed, combing every known passage of Sterkfontein's extensive system. Divers ventured further than anyone had before, covering over 900 meters of uncharted territory in the hopes of finding Peter. Unknown to them, they swam within 100 feet of Peter's final refuge several times, each time missing him by a margin so close it was almost unthinkable. As the week dragged on, Peter's hope began to falter. His body weakened. The hunger grew unbearable, and he knew that his time was running out. In the sand of that tiny island, he left a final message, scrawling his words as best as he could with what little strength remained. He addressed his wife and mother, his thoughts drifting to them as he faced his end. It was an act of courage and love, a farewell written in the fragile grains that held his last words. For nearly 6 weeks, search teams scoured the caves, holding on to the faintest hope that Peter might still be alive. But by the time they reached his final resting place, the cave had already claimed him. His body lay on the sandy island, a testament to his struggle and resilience. His final message was preserved in the sand, a haunting echo of his last days and nights in the silent darkness. Peter Verhussel's tragic story remains the only recorded death in Sterkfontein Caves. Deep in India, a little over 10 miles south of Bloomington, lies Sullivan Cave. Nearly 10 miles long, it's one of the most extensive cave systems in the state, and is a maze of corridors, rooms, and treacherous passages. Managed by the Karst Conservatory, access to the cave is tightly controlled. Its entrance has been gated since the 1990s, after past incidents of vandalism threatened the cave's natural beauty. Inside Sullivan Cave, explorers encounter 2 strikingly different chambers: the cramped backbreaker room, a passage so narrow that one has to crawl to pass through, and the towering Colossus room, an awe-inspiring space stretching 120 feet high and 200 feet long. These stark contrasts make Sullivan Cave both alluring and intimidating, a place of wonder that demands both respect and vigilance. On a chilly October morning in 2017, 19-year-old Lucas, a university student and a member of a local caving club, joined a group of 11 other students and a staff member for an expedition into Sullivan. The group gathered eagerly, prepared for hours of adventure and discovery. They entered the cave at around 10:30 a.m., their headlamps casting narrow beams into the darkness as they journeyed deeper and deeper into Sullivan's twisted corridors. They were prepared, or so they thought, having performed a careful head count and devised a system to ensure no one would get lost. But after 3 hours of exploring, something went wrong. Somewhere along the way, in the disorienting twists and turns of Sullivan, Lucas became separated from the group. Maybe he lingered a moment too long, drawn in by some shadowed detail on the walls. Maybe he took a wrong turn, trusting a path that seemed familiar, only to find himself in unknown territory. By the time he realized he was alone, the echoing footsteps of his group had long faded. Lucas quickly turned around, retracing his steps in search of the others, but Sullivan is deceptive. Passages began to look the same, and every corridor seemed to lead only to darkness. As Lucas pressed on, it dawned on him that he was no longer simply separated. He was lost. He called out, his voice swallowed by the stone walls, met only by silence. As minutes turned to hours, Lucas came to grips with his isolation. He ventured back to what he thought was the entrance path, only to discover that he was now locked inside, shut off from the outside world. Panic set in as he realized the depth of his predicament. Sullivan Cave was now his prison, a cold and unforgiving labyrinth where the only sounds were his own heartbeat and the faint trickle of water in the distance. He assessed his resources: 2 Cliff bars and empty water bottles, the meager remains of his pack. Calculating carefully, he rationed the bars, breaking off tiny pieces to make them last as long as possible. Water, however, was another problem. With no fresh source available, Lucas resorted to licking the damp cave walls, collecting whatever moisture he could to stave off hydration. It was a desperate measure, but in the darkness, survival had its own rules. Meanwhile, above ground, the caving club members had exited Sullivan, oblivious to the fact that Lucas was not among them. Their headcount system had somehow failed, and it wasn't until nearly 2 days later that they realized he was missing. By that time, Lucas had been alone in the cave for over 48 hours, his hope waning as his body weakened. Finally, on the 3rd day, the club's leader, an experienced caver and EMT, returned to Sullivan, leading a search party back into its depths. With each step, he called out for Lucas, his voice breaking the oppressive silence of the cave. Just as he began to fear the worst, a faint response echoed back. Lucas, exhausted and on the edge of consciousness, had been found. Rescuers brought him out of the cave, his body weak but his spirit remarkably intact. He had spent a harrowing 60 hours in Sullivan, relying on sheer willpower and survival instincts. But Sullivan Cave remains as silent and unforgiving as ever. It waits patiently for the next soul who dares to venture too deep. A place where the boundary between light and dark, safety and danger, is as thin as a single missed turn.